Welcome. This podcast is an exploration into being human and what's possible when there's less attention on the noise in our heads. Warning. While listening to this broadcast, you may experience moments of deep peace, sighs of relief, personal insights, or long stretches of dead air. Do not be afraid. This is normal. Under the Noise with Wyn Morgan and Kate Roberts.
Welcome to Under the Noise. I'm Kate Roberts, and I'm here with my co-host, Wyn Morgan.
Hello, Kate.
Hey, Wyn. So, Wyn, you had some thoughts on what we should talk about today. You want to go from there?
Yeah, why not? And full disclosure, sometimes Kate and I meet and we don't know what we're going to talk about, and today was one of those days. And then I reflected that some conversations I was having with people in the last few days was around decision making and how desperate we sometimes feel to make the right decision or to make a decision or to know what to do. How much that can grip us. And I've been certainly very prone to being gripped by thinking I needed to make the right decision or then go into what used to be my classic way, and I know a lot of people think that this is how to make a decision when they're unsure which path to take, is take a piece of paper, draw a line down the middle, a vertical line. On the left-hand side, list all the pluses, all the pros, and on the right-hand side, all the negatives, all the cons. And whichever is the longest list, that will be the what do I do? And it's funny because while I've tried that a number of times up until probably 10 years ago, that's what I would often do. Try and use that extreme logic of whichever list is longest, therefore that will be the decision that I take. I don't think I ever did it that way when it finally came down to it. So I might have 18 on one side, on one column, and 14 on the other. I don't know that was ever the deciding thing, because it was never that cut and dry, because I'd look at some of the things on the right-hand side and wonder, well, wait a minute, but some of these things on the 14 are more important than some of the things on the 18. So I would talk myself out of it. And it's interesting that I've heard that from lots of people in the business world about business decisions, personal lives, personal decisions about life, that we often think that the intellect is the best tool in order to make a decision. And I'm not saying the intellect is a bad thing for this at all, but I've noticed that when there's a genuine decision, there's another voice that comes through that's not from my intellect, that's always guiding, and sometimes works in extremely mysterious ways. And some people call that guiding principle. Some people call that wisdom. Some people would call that God. Some people would call that universal mind. North Star. I've also noticed that seems to have my back, even when I don't think it does. And sometimes it's shown up in really mysterious ways, where I've made some pretty amazing decisions for my life in the big picture, from a place of insecurity. And classical thinking would suggest that, well, you're making a decision when you're insecure, that might not be a good decision. Well, I don't know if that's always true. Maybe there's something even bigger at play than the minute by minute decisions or the decisions of what to do with our next 3 minutes, 3 hours, 3 years. Anyway, that would be my starter, Kate. Your thoughts?
Mm. I think in the past, I've done the same, 100%. And even if it wasn't a pro and con list in front of me, it was always from an intellectual place, where I would use basically my computer, my mind, my brain, yeah. And sometimes that took me down a path that later on I was like, what was I thinking? And sometimes, it took me down a very beautiful path that may have even changed the direction of my life. But I think that in the last few years, I've seen that there's another way of moving in one direction or another. And I see it less as the right decision or the wrong decision, and more of just what I find myself doing. And that has a certain flow to it, that when I'm making decisions, for my intellect, it doesn't have that feel of flow. And I think that in the times in my life where I felt like, oh my gosh, there's a big decision to make, right? That to me is more of an indicator now that I got too much thinking around it. Mm-hmm. Rather than, oh, there's something I need to do now. Like if it feels like that those are indicators of some action I'm supposed to take, then I realize I've got too much on it, too much thinking on it. And when I'm present and feeling that kind of flow, it just doesn't ever have that had that heaviness to it, that um, urgency, I guess is the right word, and have a sense of urgency to it. That's what I've started to see about decisions.
To me, that's a big statement to make that we've both seen something about for ourselves. That decisions that would go, we got to make the right one.
Mm.
That, and you've said it just now that, wait a minute, that means I've got a lot of thinking about it. Not that the decision itself is such a big thing. I've just got a lot of thinking about it. I'm intrigued to figure out how you noticed that.
Mm. Like, how do I notice that whatever I've got going on has a sense of urgency about it?
Well, let me ask it differently. To move from a life where decisions seemed like they were a really big deal, that it was in the decision that the big deal was, for you to now see that it's not the decision, it's that you've got thinking about it. How did that occur?
That's a great question. Okay, so if I'm being completely honest, I sense that it has to do more with, like, the more time that I've spent coming back to what's under the noise, the quiet, like, the more time I seem to spend there, the less sense that stuff seems to make. Like, I don't think there's an effort to it. I'm not trying to do it. Like, it's not like, "Woohoo, I did it." I didn't do it. I just the more time I spend in the peace that is who I am,
Mm.
under all of that, I just find myself not doing things the same way as I always did them. Like, and then when I have a lot on it, I'm sensing the difference in the two. So it becomes more obvious when I have a lot on it because I've spent more time in that space. And I don't think it's something that happens overnight. I just think it's that natural, like when we settle, when we just come back and settle. And which I'm sure if someone's listening to this podcast, they're like, oh my God, what are you talking about? But like, that's the only thing. And it's the only thing that I can use to explain how I would know the difference.
Mm.
Um, and in my 20s, I spent some time living in Spain, which was wonderful. But when I came back to the States, it was so different, right? life was so different. It was like, people saw me and they're like, oh my gosh, you're in culture shock or something, because it's like you're adjusting to the new culture. And it's almost like that. Like you can point your finger at things but it's just this shift that takes place. Um, like for example, I went back to Virginia to visit where I'm from, and I was having a conversation with someone, and I started to talk about how, I used to need things to be very orderly outside of me. So, my home was very clean, and everything was in its place, um and I noticed that in the last few years this kind of shift has taken place. I don't seem to need that to make me feel peaceful. And that wasn't a decision that I made. I just noticed I didn't seem to gravitate towards needing to organize or clean or as much as I used to. But that never was a decision that I made. Be like, oh, I'm not going to clean as much. It never felt that way. So that's just some of the things that I've started to notice, that like things shifting effortlessly, but no decision was made to change. I don't know if that makes any sense, but it's what I'm starting to see, or at least what I've seen so far.
It makes a massive amount of sense to me. And before we started recording today and we were deciding if this was what we talk about, you said something to me that reminded me that this is a good, it's been a good learning for the two of us. When you and I have, shared notes about this as we did within the last hour. And you said something about we make decisions all the time that aren't conscious. One of the biggest ones we do is to breathe out after breathing in. But that's not a logical, computer-driven, thought-generated decision. It's good to know that some of those decisions that are really taken care of. And when you said it wasn't a conscious decision to clean and tidy less, it just happened because you noticed it didn't have to be that way. And then when we notice something like that, that has a big impact on our everyday decisions and everyday way of living.
Mm-hmm.
And the bit that I loved in what you shared earlier was about what happened that made you notice that you didn't have to use the same method for making decisions. You saw that you had thinking going on when the decision looked like it really mattered. It wasn't in the decision itself, it was in your head. To notice the feeling of being at home inside, that feeling of under the noise, the feeling of the inner peace. And in my experience, and in talking to lots of other people, you included, it's a good reminder that the longer we rest there, the longer we live there, anything that isn't there feels off. And we notice that's an inner job as opposed to an outer decision that will define our life or that will cause peace, tranquility, feeling of being at home, or the opposite feeling in us. It doesn't come from those decisions. It's a lovely reminder, Kate.
Mm.
And you
You
also
know,
brought up, sorry, go on.
yeah, one of the people that helped me the most, that reminded me the most, especially for a doer like me, a fixer, right? Get to the bottom of it. And that's what I've done most of my life is you. And because you constantly remind me that there's nothing to do. Like, I'm like, oh, I see it. Now what? Okay, what do I do? And that's something that you and I talked about, when we first got on today, is people wanting to know what to do. And basically, you always remind me about what? You about what? Like, what do you mean? Yeah, you're right. And then I would just settle. And I'd settle. And it's so wonderful when you have people in your life that remind you. Do about what? Do about what? Yeah. Because doing made a lot of sense. And there's no right or wrong in this. I don't think. Like, even when I was using my intellect 24/7 to guide my life, that's not a wrong way. But there is another way.
Yeah. In listening to what you just said, the version of me 10 years ago, when he first heard that, thought, well, do about what? Then I wouldn't do anything. I literally thought that what would happen if I didn't force myself to do things and put that pressure on myself. I thought I'd stay in bed every day and wouldn't do anything else. I really did think that. And the reason I bring that up is in case anyone, if that's crossed anyone's mind listening to this today. And someone asked me that years ago. And I could say from my experience that I thought that, and how it's actually played out has been the opposite. Because I've got less on my mind, I tend to do more. I tend to do an awful lot more with a free mind. And I don't spend day after day under the duvet because, well, how do I decide when to get up? All of a sudden, they're kind of easy. But here's the point. I remember saying to somebody once years ago, it would be the equivalent of given a lion the choice of, okay, lion, you can stay here on the savannah, or you can go live in a cage in a zoo and your food's taken care of. What would you rather? I'm pretty sure the lion would say, well, that zoo sounds kind of sucky. Thanks very much. Can I stay here and live a lion's life as opposed to a caged animal's life? Because when we see, or when certainly I would say it for myself, when I saw that there was nothing scary, nothing inherently scary that was coming from the external world, including my decision and which one was the right and which one was the wrong, which I had all the time in my head. When I saw through that illusion, I was free. Therefore, putting myself in a cage, or the equivalent of spending my life under the duvet, made absolutely no sense to me anymore. So this lion did not vote for the zoo. He went, well, this savannah just looks like an awful lot more fun. Now I've seen me and the savannah for what they really are.
Mm.
And before we started today, as we were talking, you reminded me of a poem by Rumi.
Mm.
Do you have it to hand?
Mm-hmm. I don't. Do you have it still?
I do. I took a screenshot of
It
it.
would sound so much better in your amazing accent and voice. I think you should read it.
I'm glad that's not going to go to my head. Because then I'll get self-conscious over, well, I better read it right now. Now that pressure's on. Okay, here we go. So, out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field. I'll meet you there. I'll share what I see in that, but I'd love to know, because I know that's one of your favorites. What is it about that really speaks to you?
Mm. I think it points to the place inside all of us beyond our own judgment of wrong and right. Wrong and right in our own lives and our own decisions and those of others. And I think that there's a place inside all of us where we realize that there is a possibility that maybe there is no wrong way. And to meet somebody beyond wrong and right, almost like you're meeting them on a deeper level beyond all that. And I love that so much, because in that space, I can let go of all of that. And I can just put it down for a bit And that feels lighter. Doesn't mean I don't pick it back up and go where I left off, but I love that.
As I'm sitting here and listening to you, it's a reminder of, underneath all that noise of judging what is wrong and right, everything becomes one. Everything is then seen again for what unifies. As Rumi says, the field, where there is no separation. And all we're doing even when we forget and when we remember, is still living a life in whatever shape and form it takes, moment by moment. It's a heck of an experience then. Playing in the field.
Yeah. Thanks, Lynn.
Thank you. I'm glad I listened to you. Oh, let's talk about that. I'm glad we did that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. You've been listening to this week's Under the Noise with me, Win Morgan, and co-host Kate Roberts. If there's anything specifically that you'd like us to talk about, or you'd like to come along as a guest, drop us an email. Our contact details are below if you're watching on YouTube, and here in the details of the podcast if you're listening. And we'll speak to you again real soon.
Thanks for joining us. We'd love for you to subscribe, rate, and review. If you have a topic or question that you'd like us to chat about, email Win or Kate at win@winning.co.uk and kate@katerobertscoaching.com. Until then, enjoy what's possible under the noise.